Hello and welcome back to another episode of MC Airsoft. My name is Mark and today we're going to be discussing 3D printing for Airsoft. Okay, so I've been 3D printing personally for about since 2019, so about 3 years now, maybe 4, not really sure on that one, but you know, at least 3 years now. And recently I pulled back out one of my 3D printers and started doing airsoft parts. I use it mostly for business. I just haven't needed it for a while. Mostly I use it for business related stuff. I 3D print prototypes. I 3D print electronic holders, chassis, whatever you want to call it. So I have not as much experience as some people, but I have some experience. So I started doing the airsoft parts for myself. I'm not in production right now. There are better companies for that. Check out Chrono Arms. They have some good stuff. I'm not sure if they do custom stuff, but you know, go check out Chrono Arms or whoever you have locally. Talk to them. But today we're going to be discussing why 3D printing. Okay, so there are a couple big reasons why 3D printing. The first one is going to be availability. Okay, so one of the things with Airsoft is either companies will not take on projects because a seemingly lack of market, or maybe an actual lack of market, right? Maybe it's something that is going to be a limited market. So it's going to be, let's say, a Star Wars style blaster pistol, right? Some people are taking, for instance, the KJW Mark 1, Mark 2 series pistols, as I've gone over mine in the past, but some of them are taking them and making them into, you know, Star Wars blasters. There's copyright laws that might cause issues there. There's also maybe a lack of interest, right? Maybe, you know, it's going to cost, let's say, $10,000 to set up all the machines and the tooling and everything like that. That's a very low number, mind you, but say $10,000, and the profit margin's going to be, let's say, $100, and you only have 10 people who are interested in buying them. Okay, that's not going to work. That is not going to work from a business model perspective, right? Now, could they charge more on the pistols, get higher profit margin? Yes, but then the market will decrease for them, right? The more expensive something is, the less people are willing to buy them, right? So that's one issue. The other is parts or models of airsoft guns or gear that might have been made at one point and they're no longer in production, or they're producing a different variant, or they're just in low quantities, right? They're just always sold out. Something like the SIG Rattler, okay? They make the MCX, but they don't make the Rattler as of yet. That might change in the future. There is at least one person making conversion kit, but as of right now, no one's making the Rattler, and specifically, no one's making the Rattler that is the conversion kit that is being sold to the military, right? Which is a conversion kit for AR-15 or M4 or M16 style lowers, so you can make them into Rattlers, right? So if you're looking for clone correct, okay, maybe they don't make it, or at least, you know, close enough to clone correct, right? Maybe they don't make it, or maybe it's just in limited quantities. Maybe someone made it and it's just sold out everywhere, you know, or they make it but not in the color you want. which is the nice part about 3D printing. It comes in all sorts of colors, and you don't tend to feel as bad when you paint the thing, right? So that's one option. Second one is price, which depending on how you look at it can vary, and depending on how much you're going to be 3D printing, it might vary. The 3D printer I use is the Ender 5 Pro, I think, or the Ender 5. I think it's just the Ender 5. But either way, it's been upgraded with about $100 worth of parts. So you're talking about a $500 to $600 machine, depending on where you buy it, when you buy it, and things like that. I've had it for a couple years. Price might have changed, but figure about $500. Okay, and then you're talking about $25 to $30 for filament. That's what I pay. I recently ordered some eSun PLA Plus. So that's what I've been using, but I used to use Hatchbox primarily. Hatchbox is what this and the top half here are printed with, along with this. The bottom half here is the eSun. So look-wise, not too different. There is a little bit difference in material, but not a big difference to a lot of people probably. But the eSun PLA Plus was recommended and it was cheaper. So that's what I went with. So you figure about $25 per roll. Each roll is 1 kilogram, so about 2.2 pounds. And how much will that get you? If you print an entire SIG Rattler, because that's what I have set up to print next on my machine. Okay, that's going to be about, I think it was in the neighborhood of around 600 grams of filament. Now that's with my personal settings. Yours might vary. If you're using PETG, things might vary. You know, it really depends. But for me, so that's going to be about $15 worth of filament. Figure a couple dollars worth of electricity, maybe, depending on where you live. Personally, in Arizona, we export a lot of energy, so the energy bill is pretty inexpensive where I am. So, you know, that's going to fluctuate. But you figure under $20 worth of material, worth of filament, worth of electricity, things like that. So there's the cost issue too. Okay. Now that being said, if you're just buying a MCX, or if you're just going to be printing an MCX, you figure about $25 or about $20 worth of material, and electricity and all that, and you figure, okay, it's going to be, you know, 150 for the gearbox. Let's call it 250 for all the internal parts. Maybe you got a good barrel and hop up and rubber and, you know, all these other things. Figure it's about $250 for all the internals, $275 with the filament. That's still cheaper than an MCX, and also you're getting a different variant, though at a certain point, if you're only getting the printer for that one build, that's an issue. Okay, if I didn't have this printer for work and I just bought the printer, bought the filament just to print this MCX Rattler, that's an issue, because now I'm paying $650 plus the internal parts for the gun. That's an issue, right? I might as well at that point buy a Rattler, buy a new external barrel, and buy a and chop down the rail, and maybe a mock suppressor, right, to hide the rest of the internal barrel. And I have an MCX Rattler, but I only spent, you know, let's say, you know, $500 versus buying a printer, buying a filament, buying everything else. and also using up a lot of filament, just doing test prints and things like that, figuring everything out. Okay, it's not economical in that respect. But if you already have one and you're thinking about getting into Airsoft or thinking about getting into printing for Airsoft, you know, you might as well try it. So that is an option, right? But you know, if you're printing, let's say you start off with buttstock, suppressor, mount rail, or red dot mount box, new flash hider, the charging handle. I got parts for my my SSG-10 printed. I printed off a adapter for my Odin speed loader. Odds and ends, it starts adding up, right? An example of that is the Odin speed loader adapter, so I can load AK mags with it. One of those on the internet, I'm not gonna pick on any brands or manufacturers. One of those is probably gonna run you about 20 to 30 bucks depending on where you get it. Whereas in filament costs, you're talking more like $1 or $2, plus a little bit of electricity, right? But that's about the ballpark you're in. Okay, so you know, you're gonna save money on that. So if you're planning on printing long term, great. Okay, if you're planning on printing one thing, I can't recommend it. Now, you could get a cheaper 3D printer and do it that way. You can get like the Ender 3, which is what I started with. I don't really recommend it unless you're on a tight budget and you know a lot about 3D printing or have someone who's willing to teach you. The resolution just isn't as good. The structural integrity isn't as good. You're going to end up sanding and filing and, you know, having some issues there. But, you know, if you get the Ender 5, that's another option. So, you know, it's worth it in some respects. Now, for availability of parts also, there are some things that just don't exist in Airsoft, at least currently, that exist if you can 3D print it. Now, I just assembled this before starting the camera, so I haven't had a chance to sand it or anything. I don't normally sand layer lines. I mostly am just going to be sanding these lines, okay, where the parts were glued together. So what this is it is a box mag adapter for a high cap magazine. You got the fill port there. There is a threaded piece that, you know, hooks on there. There's also a little dummy bullet cover thing. But this doesn't really exist in Airsoft. We all have high cap magazines, and for most of us, we're no longer using high cap magazines. We're switched over to mid caps or things like that. Okay, so what do you do with the old high caps? Well, you could turn them into a drum. Okay, according to the posting, I believe this said 1,200 rounds, something like that. This magazine is a little bit larger. I think this held 450, something of that nature, versus the original, or the normal ones hold about 3 to 350. So maybe it'll hold a bit more. You pop 2 holes into it, and then fill through here, fill through here. Probably want to do this one first, I would imagine, but you fill it up. It's probably about 1,200 rounds. I think is what the thing said, which is not bad for a few bucks in filament and an old high cap I wasn't using anyway. So on the days that I don't feel like running plate carrier, it's nice to have another option. Okay, so I can just seat that in there and just take my rifle. Now, obviously, if your field doesn't allow it, it doesn't allow it, whatever. Okay. But it's cool to have. Some other things, as a stand-in buttstock until I buy a new one, which structural parts you can print out of 3D printed, you can print. Not going to be the most durable. It's going to be durable enough for a lot of things, but not the most durable. So like this buttstock here, I have some issues with it. It's got some sharp corners, but other than that, not bad looking. Okay, it says a couple layers of paint on it. Not bad looking. Okay, but it plants in the shoulder nicely. It's lightweight, so can't really complain too much. One thing I did do is I glued in a nut. If you can see underneath there, glued in or JB welded in a nut and mounted a screw, so it does have some adjustability and doesn't just slide off the end. Because while this did fit onto my mil-spec buffer tube on my real AR, it didn't fit onto this. Just did test fit on there. That is one thing to consider with 3D printing versus buying the actual parts as well, is that fitment. Okay, if you're buying an actual part, it will say Tokyo Marui compatible, or it'll say compatible with this brand, this model, whatever. But that might not be true for 3D printed parts, because one, the tolerances of the person measuring the original thing, so in this case like a buffer tube, okay, the person who measured it, maybe they didn't measure it accurately, maybe they measured it with a certain tolerance, maybe whatever, then they designed it, maybe they added tolerances, took away tolerances, made it bigger, smaller, whatever the case is, and then you're printing it on your printer. Maybe your filament is not in spec, maybe you're running it too hot so it bulges, maybe you're running it too cold so it doesn't adhere properly, and you end up with gaps and it's narrower. So there's a lot of things that might affect that. And then you get it all printed, maybe it fits great, and you take it out and you get delamination, which is always going to be a problem with additive manufacturing. And so you get delamination and the parts split apart. Not good, right? But, you know, for certain things like aesthetic parts, that's fine. But so, will I trust this? Maybe. I'm probably not going to be taking this to a milsim, but if I'm just taking it out to my local field to run around with, even if this breaks, not a huge deal. Okay, so that's fine. So moving up, so Unity mount, right? Obviously it's not a real Unity mount, it is a 3D printed option. I printed this before so I can see if I like that height, and if I'm comfortable shooting from there, before I spend the money on a real one or a knockoff of the real one, but a metal one. So that's another great part about 3D printing, is I can, if someone designed it, or if I want to take the time to design it, okay, I can print this, test it out. Okay, I can measure it, make sure it's the right height or the same height as the real one and all that. And I can test it out, see if I like that height. Okay, see if I want to bother with this versus a regular riser, because this, the real Unity mount has a built-in peep sight kind of thing underneath. Okay, see if I care about that. So it's a lot the same points that I made about buying reproduction items, like a reproduction chest rig or you know, something of that nature. You can try it for a much cheaper price. Okay, so that's a nice part. You can also get weird things like, you know, special charging handles, or the radian style charging handles and ambidextrous and aesthetic parts. Okay. So here's another one that I want to talk about for what can you do with 3D printing. Can it be mechanical parts? Can it be decent resolution? Okay, so that, and I'll compare this to my HAO Industries, I believe it's called, Surefire style flash hider. Okay, it's not bad looking. Okay, a little shiny. You can clean that. You can fix that with some matte spray paint, matte clear spray paint. One nice part is I did have to drill this one out, my real metal one. Didn't have to drill that out, nice and wide. Okay, so not bad dimensionally. Not 100% accurate, but it's as accurate as it needs to be, right? So, and then if you notice on this one, it has the threadings up here. Got my threadings on the inside of my knockoff Warden. It's essentially what it is. Okay, so that just screws on. And luckily it fits perfectly without me having to move my flashlight. So again, little sound mitigation device on there, which is not the same as a suppressor, but you know, hopefully that shows up decently on camera. Yes, it's got the layer lines, but from here you're gonna notice, and if I'm shooting across a field, is anyone gonna notice, right? If I'm taking a picture from back here, do any of these parts look really 3D printed? That's up to you, right? Personally, I like plastic because it's lighter, and I'm not in the best shape. So I don't mind the little bit of trade-off for looks. And I'm probably gonna end up painting this thing anyway, once I get it set up the way I want. So, you know, that'll be covered. Now, some other things you can do with 3D printing, you can do conversion kits. So you can, there's a lot of people who complain that there isn't enough like sci-fi stuff in Airsoft. Everything's too military, too real world, whatever. I get it, cool. That's the aesthetic you want. There's plenty of options in 3D printing. You can take most of your mainstream rifles, make them look like space rifles, right? Great. You can even 3D print from the ground up a space rifle if you wanted to, and just fit Airsoft internals into it. You could take something like this. You could take an AK. There's parts kits that replace the buttstock cover. You take off the grip, put on the buttstock, make it into a bullpup. Okay, so it'd be something like that. I'm not really interested in bullpups, but so it preserves all the normal functionality, makes the motor plate, covers the trigger, makes that all into a buttstock. Okay, so I can shoulder that. It comes with like a foregrip trigger assembly or pistol grip trigger assembly that mounts onto your rail. You run the wire to that, and now you have a bullpup. Cool. You know, so if that's something you want, that's not something that's terribly available from mass manufacturing, but it is something that's available from 3D printing. So if that's something you want, that's something you can do. Now, some downsides of 3D printing, cost from buying the printer, or cost from the upcharge that companies put on their products. I'm not knocking those companies, gotta make a living, right? Obviously I run a company, I gotta make a living too, I completely get it. But there is a cost factor, right? But you're getting something custom, you're getting something that probably doesn't exist from mass manufacturing, getting something a little more unique, and so, you know, and maybe it's going to be a better quality. There are companies out there, personally I print in PLA, but there are companies printing in nylon reinforced polymers, in carbon fibers, in PETGs, in TPUs, which is flexible. PETG is water bottle plastic, essentially. So, you know, there's a lot of different companies printing in different things. I would really recommend staying away from PLA unless you have your own printer. Okay, if you're printing things for yourself, if that flash suppressor or if this sound mitigation device breaks, then I can just print it. And it's more likely to break because it is PLA. PLA is more brittle. It's also cheaper and easier to print with, generally speaking. So I might print this in PLA if I'm printing it, but if I'm buying this from a manufacturer, I'm probably looking at trying to get this in a nylon fiber, in a PETG at least, something like that. Another big problem with PLA is that it warps at certain temperatures. Okay, so if I were to leave that in my car on a hot summer day in Arizona, it might warp. Now it's not going to melt because that would be a significantly higher temperature. PLA tends to liquefy about 200 degrees Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit. It's very hot. So, I mean, at that point, other things in your car are starting to melt as well. But it might deform a little bit, you know, on a very, very hot day. Okay, so that's one thing to consider. The other problem that PLA has is it is UV sensitive. So if you play on an outdoor field and you're running around with a setup like this, where 3D printed, 3D printed, 3D printed, maybe 3D printed on the mag, okay, and I leave this on a table out in the sun, which is probably not a good idea anyway because batteries and electronics and all that, but if I leave this out on the table in the sun, the 3D printed material might start to degrade, which is one reason why you might want to paint it. If you use a good solid, like Rust-Oleum camouflage or something like that, a nice solid coating of paint, you're probably going to avoid most of the UV problems that you're going to have. So that is something to be aware of. Now, on the note of breaking, depending on the parts, you're going to have different break points and different lamination areas. Is 3D printing as durable as metal? No, definitely not. Now, under normal circumstances, obviously, there's very high-end printers doing metal, doing things that are as strong as some metals. Generally speaking, no. It's not going to be as strong as metal. Is it going to be as strong as nylon reinforced polymer? Maybe, depending on who's printing it, how it's printed, and the part. And what material it's printed out of. Maybe. Are you going to get that on your normal home printer using PLA? Probably not. Is it going to stand up as well as a normal polymer or a cheaper plastic? Yes. Yeah, probably. I would put money that I would. That, and if you think about it, like on this AK here, I don't really have structural parts. I have an aesthetic part here and an aesthetic part here, and I'm going to be printing a dust cover rail for it, which again is aesthetic. Okay, it's not it's not something that really matters. If I take this to a game and I break the buttstock, I can still use it. Now the battery might flop around. I use the little LiPo batteries in there. Battery might flop around. That's an issue, but I can still use it. So if you find something that you like that's 3D printed, I recommend giving it a try. Give it a try. Talk to the manufacturer. Ask them about UV tolerances, about paint adherence. You know, whatever questions you have, ask them. because more than likely they'll be willing to talk to you about it, especially if you're a potential customer. And like I said, there's parts out there for 3D printing that you just can't find otherwise. Would I recommend getting into 3D printing just for airsoft? Probably not. Unless you already plan on getting a 3D printer for other things, and this is just another thing you can do with it, or you want to get into 3D printing and it's something that you will keep printing until you've at least made your money back on the printer, right? So, but for a lot of people who just want one or two things 3D printed, just find someone who has a 3D printer, post in your local gaming groups or whatever, your local airsoft group, see if anyone has a 3D printer. If not, see if there's any 3D printing services near you. If not, you can go through some bigger ones. I don't recommend, if you're only planning on printing one or two things, I don't recommend it. But you can print, you know, full grenade launchers, full shotguns, you know, all sorts of things. You can print full bodies, obviously not the electronics, obviously not the gearbox, well, most of the time not the gearbox, right? But there's a lot that can be done. If you're interested in really deep diving down the hobby of 3D printing as well, sure, go for it, buy a 3D printer. I recommend, if you're only getting one or two parts, just find someone else to print it for you. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and leave those down in the comments. I try and respond to all of them. But especially on this one, I can answer more questions and maybe make a second video. But until next time, stay safe and stay hydrated.